Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear EEB colleagues. My best wishes on the occasion of your 40th anniversary, and also my gratitude for inviting me to address you by means of this brief video message in the context of a panel that looks at the next 40 years. But let me begin by first of all acknowledging the immense work and success of EEB over the last 40 years. Founded only 2 years after the United Nations Environment Programme was established, you have become a true force for both innovation and progressive thinking, and ultimately also to give expression to the energy, the competence and the increasing capacity of civil society to influence the development choices that Europe, both in terms of its individual member states but as a community, is able to make. Whether it is the milestones of the Aarhus Convention or also your Zero Mercury campaign more recently, which has been extremely helpful to the negotiation of a global agreement on mercury, the Minamata Convention, they're just two examples that fit into an overall pattern of an EEB that has been a significant influence both on European policy making, but perhaps more importantly also as a vehicle for mobilizing public opinion and also public engagement. In the context of today's panel, I'm very conscious of the fact that you have very eminent speakers, and therefore perhaps my contribution in these few minutes can be to add an international perspective to the outlook of where Europe stands today and where it will hopefully provide both leadership and innovation over the next 4 decades. 3 areas are of particular significance in illustrating this. First of all, the development agenda. To some, it's an issue that relates more to developing countries, but let's be frank, whether Lisbon or the Europe 2020 strategy, Europe itself is in the midst of rethinking its development pathways and future. What is quite clear is that we live in an age of economic disruption and an age in which both the social and environmental dimensions of development are becoming ever more material to informing the economic development choices we make. Europe is in the midst of such a debate. It is in many ways a domestically focused debate, but in fact what Europe decides has major implications also well beyond its borders. This is where our work in the United Nations, for instance, on the post-2015 development agenda, the follow-up to the Rio+20 summit in terms of developing a new set of sustainable development goals with the principles of universality and integration being key drivers, becomes extremely relevant. The relationship between Europe and the rest of the world is, if anything, even more intense today than it has ever been. We are both conditioned by the choices that the rest of the world makes in terms of the future of Europe, but also the rest of the world still depends very much on European leadership and innovation in order to drive the sustainable development agenda forward. The key question before us, I think, today is whether that economic transformation will be characterized more by disruption and default choices, or whether we're able to design this transition and transformation in a more deliberate, in an incremental way, but ultimately also with the objective of transforming our economies. And this touches on the second area, which I know has been a central topic both in Brussels, across Europe, and indeed will, with the Lima Climate COP and then Paris next year, become even more central. Our individual and collective response to the challenge of climate change. Just a few days ago, UNEP released the 2014 emissions gap report, and the outlook is essentially one of drastic transformation. We are looking at a future somewhere between 2050 and 2075 where the world will have to reach a point that actually allows us to say that we will have a zero net carbon emissions economy, global economy. The challenge of getting to this point is enormous. The carbon budget that the IPCC has described is really one that we are still filling at an incremental rate and exponential. This is not good news. The potential disruption of having to later retrofit our economies to be able to stay within a 2-degree margin is becoming ever more challenging. The choices that both Europe and the rest of the world make over the next 10 to 20 years will literally influence the way the world will look in 1,000 or 2,000 years. That is something that focuses our minds and also the choices we have to make. Europe has set a very important target for itself that has certainly a major positive influence on the negotiations. We hope that Europe can also turn its own targets and commitments into a leadership and facilitation role in bringing the rest of the world together around a climate agreement, a meaningful climate agreement in Paris in 2015. A third area that perhaps speaks also to the connection between development, climate change, and Europe's influence and potential role is its relationship with Africa. Many of you know that the United Nations Environment Programme headquarters has been based here in Kenya since 1972. We have grown up, if you wish, in the real world of development choices, development dilemmas, and also the perception of what a continent like Africa sees in terms of both the support, but also the challenges and sometimes constraints that the global economy imposes on it. The relationship between Europe and Africa is a complex one. It is one that has many historical antecedents, but it also requires a new outlook into the future. It is a continent that already has 1 billion people today, will soon move towards a 2 billion people scenario, is perhaps in the next 30 to 40 years the region in the world that will grow economically and in terms of infrastructure and development choices faster than any other part of the world. Helping Africa, for instance, to make the transition in terms of a modern 21st century economy where all of its citizens have access to electricity, for instance, is going to influence a significant part of the infrastructure development choices to be made. Is Europe going to be part of enabling Africa to leapfrog into a renewable, low-carbon energy technology future? Or is Africa going to be left with no choice but to invest in the 20th century fossil fuel-based electricity generating infrastructure? The choices are very drastic and we are not moving quickly enough. How Europe defines its relationship and also the rationale and logic of engaging economically, scientifically, technologically as a partner to a continent like Africa is of immense importance. I hope that some of these choices will continue to take greater center stage in the deliberations, both of what Europe does internally and how it invests in the partnerships externally. The work of the European Environment Bureau and the progressive view of how environment can not only present a challenge to some of these economic opportunities and risks, is going to also define the nature of how development will be shaped in terms of economic, social and environmental choices. It is our hope in the United Nations Environment Programme, and certainly my personal hope, that Europe will continue to keep a broad perspective, not only in terms of what happens inside the European Union, but also how the European Union is able to relate to the rest of the world. It is a fundamental principle that has often driven European policy. It is certainly a great expectation in the international community for the years to come. I hope that you will find some of these remarks useful for the deliberations in this part of the 40th anniversary celebrations, and I thank you again for inviting me and congratulate EEB. You have done a tremendous job, and I hope for many decades to come you will continue to be a voice not only for environment in the strict sense, but also for how environment will influence the economic and social choices that our societies make. Happy birthday.